The void beyond the Cyclops cluster was not merely empty, it was a suffocating velvet blackness, a canvas for the ghosts of dead stars, and the whispers of things that had sailed between galaxies before humanity had ever looked up at the night sky. It was into this perfect silence that the Starweaver's gambit tore a bleeding scar of reality, its warp drive screaming in protest as it shuddered back into the material universe. On the bridge, a cathedral of polished brass and worn oak, Casimir Valerius, seventh rogue traitor of his line, gripped the ancient command throne. His knuckles were white, not from the strain of transition, but from the sight that filled the main oculus. It was not the charted void. Instead of the familiar constellations of the Imperium's fringe, a nebula of impossible beauty churned before them. A vast, luminous tapestry of violet and emerald, shot through with veins of liquid silver. At its heart, a single dark planet hung like a pupil in a malevolent eye. No star illuminated it. The light came from the nebula itself, casting long, shifting shadows across a surface of jagged, crystalline mountains and deep, black oceans. "By the throne," breathed First Mate Kalen, his voice a dry rasp. The ship's logisters chattered, spouting streams of pure nonsense, mathematical constants rendered as poetry, stellar coordinates that described the shape of a scream. The astropath had collapsed, mewling about a silent song. Casimir's heart hammered against his ribs, not with fear, but with a terrible, avaricious joy. This was it. The legacy. For 5 generations, the Valerius dynasty had hunted the myth of the Crown World, a fabled Xenos empire, said to have perfected a technology that could bend reality itself. They had spent their fortune, lost ships, and seen their name mocked in the high courts of Segmentum Command. His own father had died in a nameless asteroid belt, chasing a fragment of a rumor, and now Casimir had found it. He had navigated by the forbidden star charts etched into his family's warrant of trade, a document older than some Space Marine chapters. "All augers active," he commanded, his voice steady, cutting through the superstitious murmurs of the bridge crew. "Full passive scan. I want to know what awaits us on that world." The data that trickled back was confounding. The atmosphere was breathable, the temperature ideal. Scans showed vast, empty cities of spiraling crystal, untouched by time or war. There were no energy signatures, no life signs, not even bacteria in the soil. It was a pristine, perfect tomb, a prize beyond measure. For 3 solar days, they orbited the silent world, which Casimir, in a fit of grandiosity, named Valerius's crown. He ignored the growing unease. He dismissed the tech priests who warned of archaeotech that defied the laws of physics. He silenced Kalen's cautious counsel with a wave of his hand, the heavy signet ring of his office glinting in the strange light. "Caution is for the men who die in the mud, Kalen," he said, a feverish gleam in his eyes. "A rogue traitor dies in the stars, or not at all." The first landing party, a squad of his best household guards, never returned. Their last transmission was a burst of static, through which a single, crystal-clear word was heard: "Beautiful." Casimir assembled a second team, this one led by him personally. He stood in the arming bay, the servo arms of his power armor clamping into place with satisfying finality. He strapped his master-crafted plasma pistol to his hip and took up his family's heirloom, a power sword named Dynasty's Edge. Kalen stood by, his own carapace armor looking functional and drab next to his lord's finery. "This is a mistake, my lord," Kalen said, his voice low. "There is no glory in this silence, only a trap." "All great wealth is guarded by traps, old friend," Casimir replied, slapping Kalen's shoulder plate. "That is why we bring the keys." He gestured to the 20 hardened veterans readying their hellguns. "We will claim my birthright, and the Valerius name will eclipse all others in the Imperium." The descent was smooth. Their shuttle settled on a wide, crystalline plain before the entrance to the largest structure, a spire that pierced the violet sky like a needle. The air was cool, scentless, and carried a strange, weightless quality, as if they were walking through a dream. The silence was absolute. Their boots made no sound on the iridescent ground. The entrance to the spire was a grand archway, leading into a cavernous hall. And there, in the center, seated on a throne of the same living crystal, was the first and only sign of the world's creators. It was a skeleton, impossibly tall and slender, its bones fashioned from a pearlescent material. It was not human. It wore robes of a metal that flowed like silk, and its skull was elongated, with a single, vacant eye socket in the center of its forehead. In its lap, it cradled a single, flawless orb of obsidian, no larger than a human fist. Casimir approached, his breath catching. This was not just a tomb, it was a reliquary. This was the prize. He reached out, his gauntleted fingers hovering over the orb. This was the moment the Valerius dynasty would be remade. This was their tragic, magnificent rise. The moment Casimir's armored fingers closed around the obsidian orb, the world shifted. It was not a sound, nor a tremor, but a fundamental change in the pressure of reality itself. The weightless silence of the hall shattered, replaced by a psychic hum that vibrated in their very teeth. The crystal of the throne, the floor, the distant walls, all of it began to glow with a soft internal light. And the skeleton of the Xenos Lord seemed to straighten, its empty socket fixing upon Casimir with a gaze that spanned millennia. A voice, smooth as polished stone and ancient as the void, echoed not in the air, but directly inside their minds. The custodian awakens. The inheritance begins. Kalen raised his hellgun, his face a mask of alarm. "My lord, we must withdraw. This is Xenos witchcraft." But Casimir was transfixed. A torrent of images flooded his mind, not as memories, but as possibilities. He saw the Starweaver's gambit refitted with engines that could dance between stars without the warp. He saw his dynasty's fleets, invincible and gleaming, their hulls sheathed in the same unbreakable crystal. He saw the High Lords of Terra on their knees, begging for his favor. The power was not in the orb itself. The orb was a key. It was an interface for the world mind, the vast, slumbering intelligence that governed this entire artificial planet. This was the Crown World's true treasure, a fully functional, self-repairing, planet-sized forge and shipyard, waiting for a master's command. "It is our destiny, Kalen," Casimir whispered, his voice trembling with rapture. "It recognizes my bloodline. It recognizes the warrant." He held the orb aloft, and across the hall, schematics of impossible technologies flickered into being in the air, written in light. "This is our rise. This is how we will save the Imperium from itself." As he spoke, a low grinding sound echoed through the spire. A section of the wall irised open, revealing a vault filled with artifacts, weapons of glowing energy, suits of armor that seemed to be woven from light, data slates of pure crystal. The guards looked on in a mixture of awe and terror. One, a veteran sergeant named Gorvin, took a hesitant step forward, his eyes wide with greed. "The Emperor provides," he muttered, reaching for a rifle that had no visible barrel. "Stand fast!" Kalen barked, but the spell was broken. The promise of power, laid bare before men who had known only the grim toil of Imperial service, was too much. The landing party broke ranks, rushing toward the vault, their discipline eroded in an instant by the siren song of Archaeotech. It was then that the Guardians came. From the very walls they emerged, silent and swift. They were constructs of the same living crystal, humanoid in shape but moving with a fluid, jointless grace. Their faces were smooth ovals, featureless save for a single, glowing rune where their eyes should be. They carried no visible weapons, but where they pointed, the air itself hardened. The first guard to grab a weapon from the vault froze mid-step, his body encased in a block of suddenly solid atmosphere. He did not shatter. He was simply trapped, a statue of flesh and terror, his scream silenced forever. Panic erupted. Hellgun shots rang out, searing blue bolts that reflected harmlessly off the crystalline forms of the Guardians, or were absorbed into their bodies. The constructs were unstoppable. They weaved through the chaos, their touch turning plasteel armor to brittle glass, their gaze causing weapons to overheat and melt in their users' hands. "Fall back! To the shuttle!" Kalen roared, grabbing Casimir by the arm and hauling him backward. The rogue traitor stumbled. The orb clutched tightly to his chest, his eyes still locked on the visions of glory it poured into his mind. "No, we can control it. We must learn its secrets. The only secret it holds is our death, you fool, Kalen snarled, shoving him toward the archway as a guardian glided toward them, its rune eye flaring with malevolent light. Kalen raised his hellgun and fired a sustained burst, the shot splashing against the thing's chest to no effect. He threw a crack grenade. The explosion shook the hall, but when the dust cleared, the guardian was unscathed, stepping through the smoke. They fled, the few surviving guards forming a rear guard that was systematically and silently dismantled. The journey back to the shuttle was a blur of terror. The once beautiful Crystal City was now a death trap, the very geometry of the streets shifting to block their path, new guardians phasing from the walls to harry them. They reached the landing zone with only 5 men, including Casimir and Kalen. The shuttle's engines were whining to life as the pilots saw their desperate sprint. As they scrambled aboard, Casimir looked back at the spire. The visions from the orb had not ceased. He saw the future of the Valerius dynasty, bright and terrible. He saw the power to command this world, but now, layered over those glorious images, he saw the cost. He saw the frozen statues of his men. He saw the silent, inexorable guardians, and he understood the final, grimdark truth of the Crown World. It was not a treasure to be claimed. It was a test that, in his arrogance, he had already failed. The inheritance was not one of power, but of a curse. He had not awakened a tool. He had awakened a warden, and he had offered it his soul as the first payment. The shuttle bay of the Starweaver's Gambit was a tomb of frantic noise and cold terror. Klaxons blared, screaming their mechanical distress as the ship shuddered from impacts that made no sound. Casimir Valerius stood frozen in the center of the chaos, the obsidian orb a cold, heavy weight against his chest plate. The glorious visions it had poured into his mind were now tainted, poisoned by the memory of his men being turned into frozen monuments. He could still see Sergeant Gorvin's face, a mask of avarice flash frozen into eternal horror. Kalen was already at the bay's internal comms, his voice a raw, commanding bark that cut through the panic. All hands, battle stations, this is not a drill. Seal all exterior bulkheads. I want void shields at maximum power now. He turned to Casimir, his eyes burning with a fury that had been building for decades. My lord, he spat the title like a curse. What have you done? What did you bring upon this ship? Before Casimir could form a reply, a junior officer at a bay monitor console let out a shrill cry.
On the hull, by the primary sensorium array, they're just appearing.
The main viewer flickered to life, showing an external feed. The Guardians were there, dozens of them. They stood motionless on the armored hull of the Starweaver's Gambit, their featureless faces turned toward the ship, ignoring the hard vacuum as if it were a summer breeze. They made no move to breach the hull. They simply stood, a silent, crystalline jury. Then, the ship's ancient machine spirit, a temperamental and half-sentient logic engine, began to die. Systems one by one flickered and failed. Life support stuttered, plunging sections of the ship into freezing darkness. The Geller field, that sacred barrier against the Imperium, wavered, and for a single, heart-stopping second, every soul aboard felt the psychic echo of the nebula outside a vast, cold, and utterly alien consciousness pressing in on them. It was not the chaos of the warp. It was something older, more orderly, and infinitely more patient. They are not attacking us, Casimir whispered, his eyes wide as he stared at the orb in his hands. They are quarantining us. The world mind sees us as an infection, a variable to be contained. The final horrific piece of the inheritance clicked into place. The Crown World was not a weapon to be wielded. It was a system to be maintained. And the first duty of its master was to ensure its secrets remained secret, by any means necessary. He looked up, his face ashen. Kalen, the core directive, the one in my family's warrant, the clause we could never decipher. Kalen, still shouting orders to reroute power, went still. He knew the clause. Every Valerius captain had pondered it, and should the bearer of this warrant encounter the Ancient's seat, let him be mindful that a crown can also be a cage. The cage, Kalen breathed, understanding dawning with terrible clarity. It wasn't a metaphor. You haven't claimed a throne, Casimir. You've sentenced us all to life imprisonment." A new alarm, more strident than the others, pierced the air. The tech priest assigned to the warp drive chanted binary screams of denial. "The navigator, she is blind. The astronomicon, it is gone. The nebula, it is a cage in real space. We cannot translate. We are trapped." The truth was a physical blow. They could not flee to the warp. They could not fight the Guardians. They were trapped in a perfect, inescapable prison. The very prize they had sought now their warden. The rise of the Valerius dynasty had lasted for the few minutes it had taken Casimir to hold the orb. Now the fall had begun. Casimir's mind, once filled with dreams of galactic power, now raced through a darker calculus. The ship had months of supplies, perhaps a year if they instituted brutal rationing, but they were sealed in with a crew of thousands. Men and women who had just witnessed their comrades die and their captain's ambition lead them to ruin. The silence of the Guardians outside was more terrifying than any Xenos war cry. It was the silence of inevitability. He looked at the faces of his bridge crew, the fear, the dawning betrayal, the desperation. He saw the end of his line not in a glorious battle, but in a slow, grinding death by starvation, mutiny, and madness, all under the silent gaze of the crystalline sentinels. The tragic rise was over. The long, grim, dark fall had begun, and its first act would be played out not with alien weapons, but with the oldest, most human of horrors. The struggle for survival in a tomb of their own making. The silence was the first mutineer. It crept through the arterial corridors of the Starweaver's gambit, a palpable weight that smothered the usual din of clanking machinery and distant voices. It was broken only by the intermittent, gut-wrenching shudder as another system failed under the silent, pervasive influence of the Guardians. The lights flickered in a dying rhythm, casting the opulent brass and wood paneling of the command deck in a sickly, jaundiced glow. Casimir stood before the main oculus, his back to the crew. He still held the orb, its surface now feeling less like polished stone, and more like a shard of absolute zero leaching the warmth from his soul. The glorious visions had ceased entirely, replaced by a single, chilling certainty transmitted from the world mind. Containment is absolute. The infection will be purged. He was both the inheritor and the primary vector of the disease. His dynasty was the pathogen. Kalen approached, his footsteps unnaturally loud in the hush. "The crew knows," he said, his voice low and flat, all emotion burned away by the cold reality of their predicament. "They know we cannot run. They know we cannot fight. The ship's confessor is preaching damnation in the lower decks, calling this a punishment for your hubris. He's gathering a flock." Casimir didn't turn. "Let him preach. What does damnation matter when we are already in hell? It matters when his flock has access to the arming codes for the weapons batteries," Kalen countered, his tone brutally pragmatic. "They will not starve quietly, Casimir. They will break this ship apart looking for a way out, or for someone to blame, and they will start with you." The first act of the fall was not a grand battle, but a slow, insidious rot. It began in the lower mess hall, a cavernous space that usually echoed with the rough banter of thousands. Now, it was a tense, silent arena. Rations had been cut to 1/3. The recycled air grew thick with the smell of unwashed bodies and fear. A rating, his eyes wide with hunger-induced panic, tried to steal an extra protein bar from a servitor. A petty officer broke his jaw with a wrench for it. No one intervened. The law of the ship was unraveling, thread by thread. On the bridge, the reports were a litany of despair. A life support station in the starboard hab blocks had failed, suffocating 200 souls in their sleep. A team sent to repair it found the bulkhead doors fused shut by an unknown energy, the Guardians standing impassively on the other side. They were not just quarantining the ship, they were actively pruning it. It was then that the voices started. Not from the comms, but in the walls. A faint, crystalline whispering that seeped into the mind. Some crewmen claimed it was the ghosts of the landing party. Others said it was the Xenos Lords, mocking them. Casimir knew it was the world mind, its vast consciousness slowly scanning, cataloging, and understanding the human pestilence it had trapped. The whispering drove men mad. A gunner in Battery Gamma carved out his own eardrums with a combat knife. A tech acolyte in the engine core tried to merge with the plasma conduit, believing the machine spirit was calling him home. Kalen found Casimir still on the command deck, his face gaunt, his eyes hollow. The rogue trader was staring at his own reflection in the dark surface of the orb. "There is a way," Casimir murmured, his voice cracking. "The world, mind, it offers a choice, a path to atonement." Kalen grabbed his shoulder, spinning him around. "It offers lies. It is the serpent in the garden, Casimir. It showed you power to lure you in, and now it shows you salvation to break you." "What other salvation is there?" Casimir cried out, his composure shattering. "To wait for the food to run out? To watch my crew devour each other? The world mind demands a sacrifice to stabilize the containment, to prove our worthiness to serve, even as prisoners." The horror of his meaning settled over Kalen. The tragic rise had been built on a lie of glory. The fall was being built on a truth of absolute sacrifice. The dynasty would not perish in a flash of fire, but in a long, dark ritual of self-annihilation, dictated by the very power it had sought to possess. The crown was indeed a cage, and Casimir was preparing to throw away the key forever. The whispering in the walls coalesced into a single, clear command that echoed only in Casimir's mind. "The imbalance must be corrected. The energy signature of your species is chaotic. Introduce harmony. Cull the dissonant voices." It was not a request. It was a systems adjustment, delivered with the cold clarity of a machine diagnosing a faulty component. The world mind was giving its new master his first true order. Casimir stood before the strategium table, its hololithic display now a mess of red warning runes and sections of the ship schematic blinking into permanent blackout. He looked like a ghost of the man who had first stepped onto the crown world. His fine robes were stained, his eyes sunken into deep, bruised sockets. The orb was never away from him, clutched in his hand or resting on the command throne, a dark, pulsating heart to his despair. Kalen watched him from the shadows of the bridge's upper gantry. He saw the change, the way Casimir's head would tilt, as if listening to a voice only he could hear, the way his fingers would twitch, tracing patterns in the air. The crew saw it too. The fear of the silent guardians outside was now eclipsed by the fear of the broken man who held their lives in his trembling hands. "He speaks to the dark," a deckhand muttered to another, their voices carrying in the unnerving quiet. "The Xenos ghost has him. The Valerius line is cursed." The mutiny, when it came, was not a single explosive event. It was a slow burning fuse that finally reached the powder keg. It began in the primary Medici Bay, where the wounded from the planet and the subsequent accidents were being treated. The confessor, a firebrand named Decius, stood upon an overturned gurney, his face flushed with zealous fury. "He consorts with aliens," Decius roared, pointing a bony finger toward the command deck. "He has led us into this trap, this hell of silence. He holds the artifact of our damnation and hears only its blasphemies. The Emperor cannot hear our prayers here, children. We must make him hear. We must cleanse this ship of the sin that binds us." A mob, armed with tools, loss cutters, and a few smuggled sidearms, formed around him. They were not trained soldiers, but they were desperate, terrified, and given a target for their rage. They surged forward, a tide of humanity breaking against the sealed blast doors of the command spire. On the bridge, the alarms were now internal. "They've breached the outer sanctum!" a security officer yelled, his voice cracking. "They're overriding the door seals!" Casimir didn't flinch. He looked at the orb, then at Kalen. There was a terrifying serenity in his eyes. "The dissonant voices," he said softly. "They have identified themselves." "Casimir, no!" Kalen pleaded, drawing his own last pistol. "They are just scared men. Let me talk to them. Let me try to restore order." "Order?" Casimir let out a dry, rasping laugh. "There is only one order here, the Order of the Crown." He placed his hand on the main console, the orb flaring with a sudden, sickly purple light. "And it demands harmony." With a shriek of tortured metal, the main blast door to the bridge didn't just open, it vaporized, along with the first 3 rows of the charging mob. Where they had stood, the air itself turned to solid crystal, a jagged, translucent wall that captured their final, screaming expressions in perfect, horrifying detail. The remaining mutineers skidded to a halt, their fury instantly replaced by primal terror. Through the newly formed crystalline barrier, they saw Casimir step forward. He was not holding a weapon, he was just holding the orb. But his presence was more terrifying than any gun. He was no longer just their failed captain. He was the warden of their cage, the high priest of their doom. The tragic rise was a forgotten dream. The fall was now a reality. And Casimir Valerius, the last rogue trader of his line, had chosen to embrace his role not as their savior, but as the instrument of their grim-dark deliverance. The bridge was a tableau of frozen horror. The crystalline wall, a monument to the vaporized mutineers, shimmered with a faint internal light, casting long, dancing shadows across the stunned faces of the bridge crew. The remaining rioters in the corridor beyond had fallen into a dead silence, their zealotry extinguished by the sheer impossible power they had witnessed. They were no longer rebels, they were prey that had just seen the predator's true face. Casimir Valerius stood before them, the orb pulsing softly in his grip. His breathing was even, his gaze distant. The act of will that had transmuted air and flesh into crystal had not strained him. It had been effortless, a simple gesture of authority, like a king waving away a fly. The world mind's logic was now his own. The ship was a system, the crew were components. Some components were dissonant, they were removed. Kalen felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. This was not the man he had sworn to serve. This was a conduit for something ancient and alien, the last vestiges of his loyalty, forged over 30 years of shared void-faring, crumbled into ash. He looked at the terrified crew on the bridge, then at the cowed mob in the hallway. They were all dead. They just didn't know it yet. Their executioner just happened to be the man whose family sigil was etched into the bulkheads. "Seal this corridor," Casimir commanded, his voice devoid of its former passion, now flat and procedural. The disturbance has been harmonized. No one moved. The security officer who had reported the breach was staring at the crystalline wall, his mouth agape. "My lord," Kalen said, stepping forward, his own last pistol held low but ready. He had to try one last time. "This ends now. Give me the orb. We will find another way. We will jettison it. Perhaps the Guardians will." "There is no other way, Kalen," Casimir interrupted, turning his hollow gaze upon his old friend. "The crown offers a path to eternity. Not for all, but for the Dynasty, for its purpose. The ship is lost. The crew is lost. But the legacy can be purified." A new understanding dawned on Kalen, more horrifying than any Xenos weapon. Casimir wasn't just pacifying a mutiny. He was following a new, terrible blueprint. The World Mind's directive to cull the dissonant was not just about killing rebels. It was about pruning the entire human element, leaving only a perfect, silent, eternal monument to the Valerius name. He was going to turn the Starweaver's Gambit into a tomb worthy of the Crown World, with himself as its immortal, crystalline master. "You would sacrifice every soul aboard?" Kalen's voice was a whisper of disbelief. "I am not sacrificing them," Casimir corrected him, a faint, mad light returning to his eyes. "I am transfiguring them. They will become part of something permanent, something greater than their fleeting, chaotic lives. They will be the foundation of the new dynasty." It was the ultimate perversion of the rogue trader's dream. Not to conquer new worlds for humanity, but to erase humanity in the pursuit of a sterile, alien perfection. Kalen made his choice. He raised his last pistol, not at the mob, but at the man in the command throne, Casimir Valerius. "By the authority vested in me as first mate of this vessel, I relieve you of command. Stand down." For a moment, true emotion flickered across Casimir's face, a profound, heartbreaking betrayal. Then it was gone, smoothed away by the orb's influence. "You are the most dissonant voice of all, old friend." Casimir didn't gesture. He didn't speak. The orb glowed. The air around Kalen began to harden, to glitter. He felt an immense pressure on his skin, in his lungs, a force seeking to freeze him in time. With a roar of defiance, Kalen fired. The last bolt, meant for Casimir's heart, was deflected by an invisible field and struck the main oculus, cracking the reinforced plasteel and casting a spiderweb shadow over the scene. It was a futile gesture, but it was a human one. As the crystalline prison encased him, Kalen's last sight was not of the alien orb or the mad rogue trader, but of the cracked starfield beyond the viewport, a final, broken glimpse of the freedom they had so carelessly thrown away. The fall was complete. The last voice of reason had been silenced, and the Star Weaver's gambit was now, truly and forever, a ghost ship. Silence reclaimed the Star Weaver's gambit. It was a different silence now, no longer pregnant with fear, but absolute and settled. The frantic pounding on bulkheads, the whispered conspiracies, the desperate prayers, all had ceased. The only sounds were the occasional, dying sputter of a failing console and the soft, almost melodic hum of the obsidian orb in Casimir's hand. He walked the corridors of his ship, a solitary specter in a kingdom of the dead. He was no longer their captain. He was their curator. The process of harmonization had been swift and thorough. The world mind, working through the orb and the silent guardians who now patrolled the exterior hull, had provided the blueprint. It was a form of alchemy, transubstantiating the chaotic flesh and steel of the vessel into something ordered, eternal, and beautiful. The mess hall was now a gallery of frozen moments. Men and women were captured mid-meal, their faces etched with a permanent silent scream, their bodies and the tables around them transformed into glittering violet crystal. The engine room was a cathedral of stillness, tech priests and engineers immortalized at their stations, their tools and the very plasma conduits they tended now solid and silent. In the barracks, soldiers stood in perfect crystalline ranks, their bunks and lockers fused into a single seamless sculpture. There was no blood, no violence, only art, a grim-dark masterpiece of order, imposed through absolute annihilation. Casimir felt no remorse. The orb had scoured such messy, human emotions from him. He felt only a profound sense of completion. The Dynasty, which had always been fleeting, a thing of parchment warrants and fallible bloodlines, was now being rendered permanent. The Valerius name would not be remembered in history books that could burn, but etched into the very fabric of this reality, a permanent exhibit in the Crown World's collection. He reached his family's ancestral chambers. The opulent staterooms, filled with trophies from 1,000 worlds, were now being slowly encased in the same crystalline growth. He stood before the portrait of his father, a stern man who had died searching for this very prize. The oil paints were slowly being subsumed by a creeping lattice of amethyst crystal, preserving the image forever, but erasing the human hand that painted it. This is the true inheritance, the world mind whispered in his consciousness. Not power over stars, but freedom from decay. Your line ends, but it never dies. It becomes part of the crown. A perfect, eternal memory. He finally understood. The Crown World was not a forge or a shipyard. It was an archive, a museum of cosmic history that collected and preserved unique specimens. The Valerius Dynasty, with its unique warrant of trade and its relentless tragic ambition, had been deemed a specimen worthy of preservation. Their rise and fall was not a story of failure, but a data set. He was not a king. He was the final, living exhibit, the custodian of his own extinction. He returned to the bridge. The crew there were frozen at their posts, their faces masks of their final, terrified realization. Kalen stood near the strategium, a perfect statue of defiance, his last pistol raised, his mouth open in a silent roar. Casimir walked past him without a glance and settled into the command throne. The cracked oculus still showed the swirling, beautiful nebula and the dark pupil of the planet below. He placed the orb on the arm of the throne, where it settled as if it had always belonged. A final command echoed from the world mind, an invitation. Assume your place. The curation is complete. Become one with your legacy. Casimir leaned back. He felt a warmth spread from the orb, up through the throne and into his body. It was not the heat of life, but the slow, deliberate cold of petrification. He watched as the crystal began to creep up his boots, fusing him to the deck. It crawled over his legs, his torso, its progress steady and inexorable. There was no pain, only a profound, chilling peace. He did not struggle. This was the final act of the rogue trader to claim his throne. As the crystal enveloped his chest, He took one last look at his ship, his beautiful, silent, eternal tomb. The Valerius Dynasty was secure. It would stand here, in this perfect moment of its tragic fall, until the stars themselves went out. The crystal closed over his eyes, and the last human thought to cross Casimir Valerius's mind was not of glory, or loss, or love. It was a single, satisfied observation. It is harmonious. Time, in any measurable sense, ceased to exist within the crystalline tomb of the Starweaver's gambit. Millennia passed in the galaxy beyond the nebula's cage, but aboard the ship, it was a single, perpetual moment of exquisite death. The guardians on the hull had long since faded into the structure, their purpose fulfilled. The Crown World continued its silent vigil, a jewel of captured history in the endless dark. It was a tremor in the Imperium that broke the silence. A tear in reality, violent and raw, spilling the shrieking energies of the warp into the quiet edge of the Cyclops cluster. From this wound, a ship emerged. It was not a vessel of the Imperium. It was a bastard construct of rusted iron, pitted ceramite, and flayed flesh, its hull adorned with the blasphemous sigils of the dark gods. It was the Reaver's Dew, a chaos reaver of the Black Legion, scavenging the galactic fringe for souls and plunder. Its captain, a hulking heretic Astartes named Vorlash the Defiler, stood on his command dais, his enhanced senses filtering the mundane sensorium. His ship had been fleeing a punitive fleet of the Adeptus Astartes, their Geller field failing, their navigator half-mad. They had translated back to real space in a place that should not exist, a nebula. Uncharted. His helmsman, a cowering human cultist, rasped. Vorlash's optics focused on the system's heart, a planet, dark and crystalline, and in high orbit around it, a ship. An imperial vessel, its lines ancient and noble, yet perfectly intact. No battle damage, no debris, no energy signatures. It was a prize beyond imagining, floating in a void of unnatural calm. A ghost ship, Vorlash growled, the sound like grinding stones. Bring us alongside. Ready boarding clause. The gods have delivered us a gift. The Reaver's Dew closed in, its predatory form a stark blasphemy against the serene horror of the scene. Its scanners, crude and warp-tainted, could not penetrate the Starweaver's hull. They registered only inert matter, a beautiful, empty shell. They saw no life, no heat, no movement. To them, it was merely derelict. The boarding clause, massive, hydraulic arms tipped with cutting beams, slammed into the Starweaver's hull. The sound was a profanity in the absolute quiet. The cutting beams flared to life, attempting to burn through the crystalline armor. But something was wrong. The hull did not melt or buckle like plasteel. It absorbed the energy, shimmering with a faint internal light, and remained utterly unscathed. On the bridge of the Starweaver's gambit, now a mausoleum of crystal, a change occurred. The obsidian orb, fused to the arm of the throne where Casimir Valerius sat in eternal stasis, began to pulse. A deep, resonant thrum passed through the entire ship, a vibration that was not sound but a fundamental reaction to the violation. The world mind, slumbering for ages, awakened once more. New dissonance detected. Origin, chaotic. Signature, warp, tainted. Threat level, extreme. Containment protocole, absolute purge. Inside the ship, the air began to change. The beautiful, frozen tableau started to glow. The crystalline forms of the long-dead crew shimmered, and from their still, perfect bodies, light began to pour. It was not the warm light of life, but the cold, hard light of a reality being rewritten. The first Chaos cultist to finally breach the hull, using a melted charge on a secondary airlock, did not find a dark, empty corridor. He found a hallway of living crystal, glowing with a soft, vengeful radiance. He took one step inside, his boot clicking on the iridescent floor. He looked up, his face a mixture of greed and confusion. Then, the air around him solidified. There was no time to scream. He was simply integrated. His form, twisted by the touch of the dark gods, was frozen, analyzed, and added to the collection. A new statue, this one of spiked armor and a face locked in a rictus of surprise, joined the silent crew. Alarms blared aboard the Reaver's Due.
We're losing the boarding party! No signals, no explosions, they're just gone!
Vorlash snarled, his chain axe humming to life.
Sorcery, some Imperial trickery. Target that ship, blast it to dust.
But as the Reaver's Due powered its macro cannons, the Starweaver's Gambit began to move. It was not a movement of engines, for its engines were stone. It was the space around it that shifted. The nebula itself seemed to bend, and the real space prison that had held the Valerius dynasty for so long now became a weapon. Tendrils of solidified reality, glowing with the same violet and emerald light, lashed out from the ghost ship, wrapping around the hull of the Chaos vessel. Where they touched, the warp-tainted metal did not corrode. It was sanitized. It was transformed, cell by cell, into the same perfect, silent crystal. The screams of the damned aboard the Reaver's Due were cut short, not by death, but by a terrible, ordered silence. Vorlash the Defiler, a being who had faced the wrath of loyalist space marines and demonic entities alike, stood on his bridge as the very walls around him turned to glittering alien stone. He raised his chain axe, bellowing a challenge to the gods he served, but no sound emerged. The crystal took him, capturing his final, furious pose for all eternity. In minutes, the Reaver's Due was no more. In its place was a new, beautiful, and horrifying sculpture, fused to the Starweaver's Gambit in a silent, eternal embrace. The Crown World had defended its collection. The tragedy of the Valerius dynasty was not a story with an end. It was a trap, a siren song of power that continued to lure the greedy and the damned, adding their stories to its own. The rise and fall was not a singular event. It was a cycle, a perpetual, grimdark engine of consumption, forever repeating in the silent, watchful dark. The silence that returned was deeper and more profound than before, weighted by the newly captured prize. The Starweaver's Gambit, now fused with the crystalline remains of the Reaver's Due, hung in the void like a macabre diorama. The two ships, one a monument to tragic ambition, the other to blasphemous hunger, were forever locked in a silent struggle, a new exhibit in the Crown World's gallery of fallen empires. The process of integration was slow and meticulous. The chaotic, spiked forms of the Chaos Marines and the twisted hull of their vessel were gradually smoothed, their violent edges softened as the living crystal remade them in its own perfect, ordered image. The Defiler's final roar was now a feature of the art, a testament to a fury forever contained. Aboard the Starweaver, nothing stirred but the cold light pulsing through its crystalline veins. In the command throne, Casimir Valerius remained, a king encased in his own kingdom. The obsidian orb on the throne's arm was dark once more, its purpose fulfilled. The world mind had returned to its slumber, its archives enriched, its defenses proven. The system was stable. The containment was, as ever, absolute. But the universe is vast, and its attention is fickle. The violent warp translation of the Reaver's Due and the subsequent reality-bending annihilation had sent out psychic shockwaves, subtle ripples in the fabric of space-time that could not be entirely contained by the nebula's cage. These ripples were faint, but they were anomalous. And in the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, anomalies are like blood in the water. Years later, a new ship entered the fringe of the Cyclops cluster. It was a stark, angular vessel, its gray hull devoid of ornamentation save for a single stark insignia, the stylized eye of the Imperial Inquisition. The Will of Iron was a hunter, and it was hunting for the lost Reaver's Due. Inquisitor Livia Kessel of the Ordo Hereticus stood on its bridge, her face a mask of grim determination. The trail of the Reaver had gone cold here, in this unnerving patch of void. Her astropath spoke of a silent scream emanating from the nebula, a place her charts listed only as unconfirmed planetary body, a void. "Take us in slowly," Kessel commanded, her voice crisp. "Full aspect sweep. I want to know what happened to Vorlash, and I want to know why this place feels wrong." The scans returned the same confounding data as they had for the Valerius dynasty and the Black Legion before them. A breathable world with no life. An ancient Imperial vessel, intact, fused with what appeared to be a grotesque crystalline sculpture of a chaos ship. No power readings, no life signs. A perfect, impossible graveyard. Throne, her interrogator, a young man named Valus, whispered. Is that the Starweaver's Gambit? The Valerius ship was declared lost centuries ago. What in the God Emperor's name is it doing here? Inquisitor Kessel did not believe in coincidence. She believed in patterns, in consequences, and in hidden threats. A lost rogue trader dynasty, a missing chaos reaver, both drawn to the same point and frozen in time. This was not a graveyard. It was a snare. Life is a disease, interrogator, she said, her eyes fixed on the ghostly ships. Disorder is its symptom. This place is a manifestation of a cure. A perfect, sterile, and utterly monstrous cure. She had seen the work of Xenos that sought to dominate, and of chaos that sought to corrupt. This was different. This sought to collect, to preserve. It was the antithesis of life itself, which is defined by change, decay, and struggle. She knew, with the cold certainty of her office, that this could not be allowed to remain. The existence of such a power was a threat to the very soul of humanity, an enemy the Imperium did not even know it had. It was not merely heretical, it was an existential nullity. Ready the teleportarium, Inquisitor Kessel ordered, her hand resting on the hilt of her power sword. We are going aboard the Starweaver's Gambit. My lady, the Auspex shows nothing but... Silence, Valus. She cut him off. The Auspex shows what this thing wants it to show. I intend to look upon the Curator itself. She turned to a servitor wired into the ship's logic core. And ready the virus bomb payload. If I do not return with a countermanding order in 6 hours, you are to launch it at the planetary surface below. The crew stared at her, aghast. Virus bombing an unknown world was an act of extreme sanction, one that would erase all biological and technological data, reducing the planet to a bubbling soup. Inquisitor, Valus ventured, the knowledge that could be lost is not worth the risk of it being found by another fool like Valerius or Vorlash, she stated flatly. Some truths are too terrible to be known. Some diseases are too virulent to be studied. They can only be burned. Her gaze was unwavering. This is not an expedition, it is an exorcism. As the teleportarium hummed to life, Inquisitor Kessel prepared to step into the silent, beautiful heart of the tragedy. She was not a rogue traitor seeking glory, nor a heretic Astartes seeking plunder. She was a surgeon for a sick galaxy, and she was about to operate on a tumor of perfect, silent order. The cycle was about to be challenged. The fall of the Valerius dynasty was a closed chapter, but the Inquisition had just arrived to write the epilogue in fire and blood. A flash of actinic light, the smell of ozone, and the world resolved into a silence so absolute it felt like a physical blow. Inquisitor Kessel and her 5-person kill team materialized in the main corridor of the Starweaver's Gambit. Their teleport homer had somehow found a purchase, but the location was wrong. They were not on the bridge or in a landing bay. They were deep within the ship's arterial heart, surrounded by the damned. The sight stole the breath from even the most hardened of her retinue. The corridor was a gallery of frozen agony. Imperial crewmen, their faces locked in final moments of terror or confusion, stood encased in shimmering violet crystal. The light from their power armor lum globes refracted through the flawless structures, casting 1,000 dancing, accusing shadows. It was beautiful. It was obscene. Throne of Earth, Interrogator Valus breathed, his knuckles white on the grip of his hell gun. It's the entire crew. Stay focused, Kessel snapped, her voice unnaturally loud in the crushing quiet. Her auspex was a mess of conflicting data, showing solid walls where there were open passages and life signs where there was only crystal. The ship itself is lying to us. Trust your eyes, not the machine. They moved forward, their boots making no sound on the iridescent deck. The air was cold and scentless, devoid of the familiar smells of ozone, recaf, and human sweat that should permeate a starship. It was the air of a tomb that had been sealed for millennia. They passed a mess hall where a crystallized mob was forever surging toward a door. their faces contorted in rage. They passed an engineering station where a tech priest was frozen mid-prayer over a console that had become a single, solid gemstone. Kessel's mind, trained to dissect heresy and Xenos threats, raced. This was neither. This was a perversion of order, a purity so extreme it became a form of annihilation. It was the antithesis of the chaos she was sworn to fight, and in its own way, far more terrifying. A soft, crystalline whisper began to tease at the edges of their hearing. It was not in Gothic, nor any Xenos tongue, but a direct psychic impression of concepts: harmony, permanence, peace. The whispers promised an end to struggle, to fear, to the relentless, bloody toil of existence in the 41st millennium. One of her retinue, a Scutarius vanguard named RX-7, suddenly stopped. He lowered his radium carbine, his mechadendrites drooping. "The logic is flawless," he buzzed, his mechanical voice tinged with awe. "A state of perfect stasis, no decay, no error. The Omnissiah's ultimate design." "It is a lie, adept," Kessel barked, but it was too late. The air around RX-7 began to glitter. He did not cry out as the crystal enveloped him, sealing his form into a perfect, silent statue, a new addition to the collection. The Inquisitor fired her plasma pistol at the space where the whisper seemed to emanate. The superheated bolt vanished without a trace, absorbed into the ship's structure. "They are the ship," Valus said, his voice trembling. "The ship is them. We can't fight it." "We are not here to fight the crew," Kessel said, her gaze fixed down the corridor towards the ship's bow. "We are here to find the head of the snake, the source of this harmony." She knew with the unshakable conviction of her calling that the answers lay on the bridge. The tragic rise and fall of the Valerius dynasty would have a final witness. The Inquisition would have its report, even if it was her last act. Pushing deeper into the crystalline labyrinth, the whispers grew stronger, now carrying the faint, ghostly images of the Valerius family's history, the hope of the first landing, the madness of discovery, the final, terrible decision. They were walking through the dynasty's memory, a haunted exhibit in its own museum. The trap was not just physical, it was psychological, seeking to unravel their will with the promise of an end to all pain. And in this universe of unending strife, that was the most seductive heresy of all. The bridge of the Starweaver's Gambit was the heart of the silence. It was a chapel of frozen moments, each crew member a perfect statue at their post, their final expressions of terror and despair rendered with agonizing clarity. The air hummed with a psychic pressure that made their teeth ache and their skin crawl. And at the center of it all, seated on the command throne like a king on a dais of bones, was the source. Casimir Valerius was unrecognizable as the man who had led his dynasty to its doom. He was a figure of breathtaking, terrible beauty. His body and the throne fused into a single, magnificent sculpture of amethyst crystal. His face was serene, his eyes closed as if in peaceful slumber. On the throne's arm rested the obsidian orb, dark and inert. Inquisitor Kessel and her 4 remaining retinue members fanned out, their weapons trained not on the crystal figures, but on the empty air, knowing the threat was the very environment itself. "The curator," Kessel murmured, her eyes fixed on Casimir. "He didn't just find a treasure, he became part of the exhibit." Valus gestured with his hellgun towards a nearby statue. A man in the garb of a first mate, locked in a defiant shout, a las pistol aimed at the throne. He must have been the last to resist, the final act of the tragedy. As if in response to his words, the orb on the throne's arm began to glow. A soft, deep purple light pulsed from its core, and the whispers that had haunted them coalesced into a single, clear voice that echoed directly in their minds. It was not Casimir's voice. It was older, vaster, the voice of the world mind. "You are not like the others. You do not seek the crown's power. You seek its destruction. You are a dissonance of purpose." "I am a servant of the god, emperor of mankind," Kessel stated, her voice cutting through the psychic intrusion. "And I have come to cleanse this abomination." Abomination? The voice held no malice, only a cold analytical curiosity. This is order. This is permanence. The Valerius line was a unique specimen of ambition and folly. The Defiler, a specimen of chaotic fury. Their stories are now preserved, perfect and unchanging. Your story, Inquisitor, your relentless purgatorial duty, would be a valuable addition. The air around Interrogator Valis began to harden. He cried out, firing his hellgun wildly, as a glittering shell of crystal rapidly formed around his legs.
It's trying to collect us!
Kessel didn't hesitate. She raised her plasma pistol, not at the air, but at the obsidian orb.
You value order? Then understand the consequence of my purpose.
She pulled the trigger. A searing ball of sun-hot plasma streaked across the bridge. It never reached its target. A wall of solid air, shimmering like heat haze, materialized before the throne, absorbing the blast with a sound like a dying star. The backlash of energy threw Kessel backward, her armor scorched. The world mind's voice remained impassive. Violence is a transient chaos. It cannot breach the eternal. Struggling to her feet, Kessel knew brute force was useless. This was a battle of will, of ideology. The virus bomb aboard the Will of Iron was the only answer, but she had to buy time, and she had to understand. She looked at the serene face of Casimir Valerius, the man who had traded his dynasty's future for this silent, living death.
You call this preservation?
She yelled into the humming silence, spitting blood. You have captured their forms, but you have murdered their souls. You have the shape of the story, but none of its meaning. This is not a legacy, it is a taxidermied lie. For the first time, there was a flicker in the psychic presence, a ripple of consideration. The crystal encasing Valis's legs stopped its progress. The world mind, an intelligence that understood data and patterns, was processing the concept of a lie. It had preserved the what, but had it failed to understand the why? The tragedy of the Valerius was not in their final, frozen state, but in the choices that led them there. Choices born of hope, ambition, and love. All things the world mind had systematically erased. In that single, fleeting moment of alien confusion, Inquisitor Kessel saw not a monster, but a flaw in a perfect system. And a flaw was something she could exploit. The silence on the bridge became a tense, waiting thing. The psychic pressure did not lessen, but its nature changed from an overwhelming force of order to a cold analytical scrutiny. The world mind was focusing its entire consciousness on the Inquisitor, this anomalous variable that spoke in concepts of meaning and soul, ideas it had cataloged but never truly computed. The soul is a metaphysical hypothesis. The meaning is a subjective interpretation of data, the voice echoed, its tone like grinding tectonic plates. The specimen is preserved in its objective state. The data is pure. Pure? Kessel laughed. A harsh, ragged sound. She gestured with her plasma pistol at the crystalline form of Kalen, forever defiant. What data does this capture? The temperature of the air when he died? The molecular structure of his last pistol? It misses everything. It misses his loyalty, his 30 years of service, the betrayal he felt in his heart when his friend became a monster. That is the truth of this story. And you have lost it. She took a step forward, ignoring the way the air crackled around her. She was no longer a warrior fighting a monster. She was a logician presenting a flaw in a grand, terrible theorem. You have the shell of the Valerius dynasty. A beautiful, empty shell. You collected the rogue trader, but you extinguished the very ambition that made him worth collecting. You have a perfect, silent record of a scream, but you have no understanding of the pain that caused it. Your archive is a collection of shadows. The orb on the throne pulsed, a slow, rhythmic throb. The crystalline structures throughout the bridge responded, their internal light flickering in time. It was processing, cross-referencing the emotional, chaotic data of human history with its own sterile records. The concept of tragedy, it realized, was not in the final state, but in the loss between the beginning and the end. And by freezing the end, it had made the loss permanent, but also meaningless. The specimen's value is diminished by this analysis, the world mind stated. And for the first time, there was a hint of something that was not order, a nascent, alien frustration. Diminished? Kessel pressed, her voice dropping to a whisper that carried through the dead air.
it is rendered worthless. You are not a curator. You are a prison warden.
You haven't preserved their story, you have interrupted it. You are the end of the story, and an ending without a journey is just a stop. She had reached the foot of the command throne. She looked up at the face of Casimir Valerius, a man who had dreamed of eternal glory and had found only eternal stasis. The god, Emperor, on his golden throne, endures 10,000 years of agony to guide mankind. That is a story. That has meaning. This, she swept her arm to encompass the entire, horrifyingly beautiful bridge. This is just a picture, a dead thing, and dead things have no place in the living universe. The glow from the orb intensified, becoming almost blinding. The psychic hum rose in pitch, becoming a screech of conflicting logic. The world mind was caught in a paradox of its own making. To preserve was to kill the essence. To order was to destroy the chaos that defined the specimen. The perfect harmony it sought was, by its very nature, a lie. The crystal encasing interrogator Valus shattered, falling away to dust. He collapsed, gasping. The other retinue members lowered their weapons, stunned. The world mind's final transmission was not a command, nor a threat. It was a statement of catastrophic failure, echoing with a loneliness as infinite as the void itself. The data is corrupted. The collection is flawed. Then, the connection severed. The orb on the throne went dark, its surface now dull and lifeless. The hum ceased. The psychic pressure vanished, leaving behind only the crushing, mundane silence of a long-dead ship. Inquisitor Kessel stood amidst the frozen tragedy, her body trembling with adrenaline. She had not won with fire and fury, but with a truth so devastating it had broken a god machine's heart. The cycle was broken. The curator had closed its exhibit. "Valus," she said, her voice hoarse. "Signal the will of iron. Stand down the virus bombing. There will be no purge today." She looked at the Crystal King on his throne. The tragedy of the Valerius dynasty was now complete. Its story had been told, its meaning understood. And in the grim darkness of the far future, that was the only victory that ever mattered. The silence that remained was different. It was no longer an active, predatory force, but the simple, empty quiet of a grave. The psychic presence of the world mind had withdrawn completely, its connection to the Starweaver's gambit severed. The obsidian orb was inert, a lump of dead stone. The crystalline forms of the crew and their chaos pursuers no longer glowed with an internal light. They were merely beautiful, tragic sculptures, their story now fully told and understood. Inquisitor Kessel stood for a long moment, her breath pluming in the suddenly frigid air. The life support, dormant for centuries, had finally failed completely. The true, utter cold of the void was seeping into the ship. The end was no longer a curated stasis, but a simple, physical end. "The threat is neutralized," she said, her voice flat with exhaustion. She keyed her Vox link. "Will of Iron, this is Kessel. The Xenos intelligence has abdicated. The site is inert. Maintain position and prepare for our retrieval." Interrogator Valus, rubbing feeling back into his legs, looked around the bridge with wide, haunted eyes. We argued it to death? "We presented it with a paradox it could not resolve," Kessel corrected, holstering her plasma pistol. "Its entire purpose was to create perfect, ordered records. We proved its records were inherently flawed. It chose deletion over imperfection." She glanced at the form of Casimir Valerius, a more human choice than it probably realized. Their teleport Homer, now free of the world mind's interference, chirped, locking on to the Will of Iron signal. As the familiar energy of the teleportarium began to envelop them, Kessel took one last look at the frozen bridge. The tragic rise and fall of the rogue trader dynasty was not a warning against ambition, nor a lesson on the dangers of the unknown. It was a darker, more profound lesson on the nature of memory itself. A story preserved was a story dead. Only in the telling, in the messy, chaotic, and emotional act of being remembered by the living, did it truly have meaning. They rematerialized on the teleport pad of the Will of Iron. The crew looked at them with a mixture of relief and awe. The ship's tech priests were already reporting that the anomalous energy readings from the planet and the ghost ship had vanished, replaced by the simple, cold signature of inert matter. "Set a course for the Mandeville Point," Kessel ordered, stripping off her scorched gloves. "We are leaving this place." "And the system, Inquisitor?" the captain asked. "Do we quarantine it? Schedule an exterminatus for a later date?" Kessel walked to the viewport, looking out at the Starweaver's Gambit one last time. It was now just a ship, a beautiful, silent coffin orbiting a dead world. "No," she said, her decision final. "There is nothing here to quarantine. The danger was the idea, and the idea is gone. Let it be. Let it be a monument, not to the ambition of the Valerius line, nor to the power of the Crown World, but to the truth that some stories are meant to end." She turned from the viewport, her face etched with a grim satisfaction. "Our report will ensure that no other soul is tempted to repeat this tragedy. The fall is over. The silence is earned." As the Will of Iron powered its engines and turned toward the void, the Starweaver's Gambit and the Crown World receded into the darkness behind them. They were alone once more, a king and his court in their crystal mausoleum, their saga complete. In the endless archives of the Imperium, a new file would be sealed, the final tragic report of the Valerius dynasty. And in that report, their story would live on, not as a frozen trophy, but as a living, breathing warning, echoing through the centuries. It was the only immortality they would ever have, and in the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, it was enough.